Nina Tassler, president of our entertainment division, who at the time was head of drama, developed this show. We had been courting Jerry Bruckheimer and Jonathan Lippman, who's the head of his TV group, for a long time to do something. They came up with this, they found this writer, Anthony Zeiker, who was a young writer from Las Vegas. He was working as a tram driver in Las Vegas when he wrote the CSI script. Evidently, he wrote a couple of feature spec scripts, met with Jerry. Jerry liked him. He pitched Jerry this idea for CSI. Came in, Nina really loved it. She bought the idea. We had earlier signed a development deal with Billy Peterson. He was one of the actors who I had been keeping my eye on, you know. I think I had a meeting with Billy Peterson once a year for 8 years until he finally signed a deal, because I said, this is a terrific actor who was made for television, you know. He was great in all his independent movies, and I knew he'd be a big TV star if he found the right thing. So anyway, Anthony came in with Lippman and Bruckheimer. Nina bought the script. They wrote the script. They attached Billy Peterson to the script before it was written. One of our last pickups of the script, one of the last scripts developed, and probably the last pilot picked up at the time. You know, Nina was its champion. I liked it, you know. When we screened the pilot, I'll never forget this, we screened it in my office during lunchtime, which is when we do it, you know, like 5 or 6 of us, that's the first screening. And I'm eating a sandwich when the maggots are crawling out of somebody's dead body. And I said, I can't watch this. I threw down my sandwich and I said, this is like awful. I mean, it was, look, it was a very, very good pilot. Did I know it was going to be as big a hit? No way. I mean, we liked it. Was it a slam dunk for the schedule? No, a probable. I remember getting the call from Billy lobbying for it. He really loved it. He really wanted to do it. He thought it was great, you know, and I respected him, and I had spent a long time recruiting him. Nina was a big fan. The interesting thing about that show is, as I said, it went on Friday night at 9 o'clock. The same year, we thought the winner was the 8 o'clock show, which was The Fugitive. You know, the new Fugitive. The Harrison Ford movie had come out and revitalized the franchise. We got Tim Daly, a very good TV actor, to do it. We did what I thought was a wonderful pilot. So we put that Friday at 8, and CSI was the Friday at 9 o'clock show. The Fugitive got most of the promotion. As I mentioned yesterday or before, we did research on CSI. We were actually very pleasantly surprised. The research said people are really grabbing onto this more than we would have expected. There's really something here. We also, you know, in putting out our promos, you know, you do these things called awareness studies. In other words, how effective are your promos being? And CSI was grabbing people's attention from the promos. There was something happening out there. So the show's open, and Fugitive did fine, but CSI beat it first week out of the box, which is very unusual. Especially, Fugitive had a great name recognition. CSI, nobody heard of it. By the third week, CSI was clearly a smash hit. On Friday night, it was growing with a rocket. Fugitive was sort of laying there, you know, and it was clear we had caught lightning in a bottle with CSI. You know, the decision to spin off CSI, in all fairness, Dick Wolf deserves a lot of the credit for it. You know, Law & Order had obviously done it successfully with one of their spin-offs then. I think it was only one other at that time. And it worked successfully. And you said, okay, that's a procedural, and there clearly were similarities between Law & Order and CSI. So I've often said, and we were the ones that, you know, were pushing for that to happen, for them to do the spin-off. It was then, okay, where do we do it? What's the city, you know? And I don't remember, I believe it was Zeiker or Donahue or Mendelsohn who thought up Miami, or maybe Jerry. I don't remember how that came to pass, but it was decided, since Vegas was a night show, that we wanted a day show. And what would be a sexy place to be in the day was Miami, you know, hot city. And what they did with Miami, which is remarkable, they gave it a whole different look. They gave it a whole different look. I mean, the brightness of Miami is different than any other show on television. which is why I believe CSI Miami is the #1 show in the world. In other words, internationally, it's like #1 in a number of countries, because of the look, And by the way, the guy who deserves credit, who did the original CSI, was Danny Cannon. He also did Miami, was the director, Basically, once again, an independent film director, And the great thing about working with a Jerry Bruckheimer, he's, we're doing CSI and we're deciding who to direct, and Jerry says, I got this great young director. I said, terrific, who is it? He said, Danny Cannon. And I said, what has he done? And his credits were not, I think his biggest movie was I Know What You Did Last Summer 2, or something like that. And Jerry said, no, trust me, this guy's a comer. This guy's got a great eye. He's got a great vision for stuff. And, look, Jerry is a great collaborator. I said, great. Look, you're a very visual guy in all your movies, and if you believe in this guy, I'm with you, And it ended up being brilliant. And he also did New York. He did New York, which we had to do some changes on because that started out, the look of that show was a bit too dark. We blew that show up the second year in terms of the look and style of that show. And that also, had a great renaissance because of that.